Welcome, everyone. I'm Ian Dobson. I'm race director here at the Eugene Marathon, and we're pleased to have you joining us for our virtual expo. I'm here today we've got two guests, two great special guests for our segment that we're calling Don't Stop After the Finish Line, what to do after a big race. We're really trying to kind of flip some of what we typically have done at expo programming on its head. Rather than talk about training advice and all that, we're talking about what to do next. So you are where you are, you're at the starting line, and so we want to talk about how do you come off of this race as healthy as possible. So got Ryan Hall and Bryan Dondero here with us. Do quick introductions here. Ryan Hall has been a friend and a teammate of mine for a long time. We ran together in college and post collegiately. Ryan is 2008 Olympian, 2012 too, right, Ryan? Didn't make it on your bio, but 2008, 2012 Olympic marathoner, fastest American marathoner ever, ran 2:04 in Boston, and still the American record holder at half marathon. You also have some weightlifting PRs that I don't know about, but I know they're significant. Ryan doesn't look like a marathoner anymore, but yeah, we've got an athlete with two different athletic lifestyles that he's lived, so that's very interesting. And then Bryan is a physical therapist at PeaceHealth, a medical partner. And Bryan, can you tell us just a bit of your background and medical history?
Yeah, I graduated at the University of Vermont. That's where I received my doctorate in physical therapy. My background's primarily in manual therapy, which is joint mobilization, joint manipulation, and treatments that oftentimes is rehabilitative. But what we're really trying to push for with physical therapy is that we're looking at preventative measures and how to help people all across the board, all levels of athletes and runners and non-runners. And that's basically my background. I also have an interest in exercise physiotherapy and avid exerciser and runner. Nowhere comparable to Ryan, but but something I enjoy.
and that's part of the what we're trying to accomplish here, I think, in this discussion, is kind of bridging things from the elite level where Ryan competed at. I should also mention in Ryan's bio that Ryan's wife, Sarah Hall, Ryan, I think, helps coach her, and Sarah, currently America's fastest female marathoner. She ran 2:20 just back in December. So we're bridging the gap from that sort of athletic performance to the bulk of our participants, where I live now, where Bryan lives, where we're not necessarily less serious, but certainly less accomplished at this point. So and just we want to draw some similarities here, and kind of make it clear that what the elites are doing is also applicable to our general audience. So maybe we can just kick it off here. Ryan, can you walk us through from a physical therapy standpoint, from a structural health standpoint, what did you do, I should say now, after a primary race, after a marathon? What does that 24 hours, 48 hours week look like after that in terms of the physical recovery that you're doing?
Yeah, I love how you phrase that question, because what I did do and then now what I recommend my athletes to do are two different things. So I actually wanted to start with like a super quick story of winning the Olympic trials in 2007, New York City. Ian was out there for that, and just had like an epic day, nailed it. And you know how it is after you have a good marathon, you're just like, woohoo, I'm done. Like, I'm sick of doing all the ice baths and the recovery stuff and the stretching. Like, I'm just going to go ham on donuts and just like enjoy myself and not even think about running. Like, I wouldn't even let myself put on my running watch for 2 weeks after I'd run a marathon. So going back to that story, I won the Olympic trials. Next day, I hopped on an airplane, went to Israel, and didn't cool down after the race, which is normal for a marathon. And I don't advise people to cool down after a marathon. I think that's too extreme. But didn't cool down, didn't run the next day, just hopped on a long flight to Israel, went to Israel. It was an amazing vacation, 2 weeks, came back. It was time to start running again. And I remember the first run I went on was with Sarah, and it was like comically bad. Like, she was just laughing at me the whole time. She's like, you look like the oldest man I've ever seen trying to run. Like, I was just a mess, like could barely move, like honestly could barely run at all. And I was like, what just happened? Like, I thought my career was over. It's like, here I had just qualified for my first Olympic team. It's like, I can't even run anymore. I'm like done. Like, that was honestly like an honest thought that I had. And it took weeks and weeks of physical therapy. You know, we went and traveled to various therapists that gradually put me back together, but my body had never been in such a mess. And so what I learned from that is what I want to share with you guys. In my opinion, the most important aspect of recovery is blood flow. So the mistake I made is just, I stopped my run. It's like party time on an airplane, sitting down, and no blood flow, zero blood flow, right? For like a number of days. So I learned from that experience, and I learned, okay, like actually the next marathon buildup starts the moment you finish your marathon race. And it is a time to celebrate, that is important, but just working in like 5 minutes of walking around town, doing some contrast baths if you can, just doing like a little something is going to make such a big difference in coming back from your marathon. So what I recommend with my athletes now is like, go for a walk later in the afternoon after you finish your marathon. The next day, go for a really slow 30-minute either walk or jog. And I've had some of the most epically slow 30-minute jogs the day after. Like, I remember the day after I ran 204 Boston, just like pathetically slow 30-minute jog, but that helped me so much to recover, for my legs to get back into a good spot. And then I was mentioning too, I love contrast bath, going from hot to cold, hot to cold. And you know, you don't need like a recovery facility to do this. All you need is like a house that has 2 bathtubs. You make one cold, make one hot, 3 minutes in one, then go to the other for 3 minutes, back and forth. And it just gets that blood just pumping through your legs. And that's really, in my opinion, like the biggest key to coming off a marathon well, is keeping that recovery in there. And so now, like with my athletes, instead of just doing 2 weeks, no running at all, complete break, it's like, okay, we're going to do 30 minutes of light activity. And it could be swimming, it could be biking, it can be jogging. We're going to do that every other day for 2 weeks before we start back into training. And I've had a much better track record with athletes coming back, not getting hurt, not having their legs how my legs were when they were just a mess.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And Bryan, can you kind of talk about what, like in that particular case, like what happened to Ryan's body? Like, what's the damage done during the event, afterwards? Tell us from your perspective, like what's going on
some edema problems, you know, that that's not uncommon, especially for our elite athletes, if they're traveling and hopping on a plane immediately following very strenuous activity. You know, oftentimes you'll have people on airplanes wearing compression socks, and that's, I think, maybe going back, that's where some of that trend started, is for people to, you know, dealing with edema. I see it all the time, post-op people after a total knee replacement, they have to wear their big TED hose to help that blood circulation, because the muscles are not functioning at 100%. So then sitting for long hours, you said Israel, I think, was it that you went to? So really long flight and sitting down, and then plus the elevation change, I think, affects that as well. And the blood flow, I agree with Ryan 110% that's really important in terms of having that recovery, because it's all the metabolites, the micro trauma that happens to the muscles. Blood flow is what's going to help restore that, kind of cleaning out the tissues and help things rebound from it, getting better protein synthesis, recovering, adapting. The contrast bath, I wanted to ask Ryan, do you have a time that you found that works well, as far as like how long in each temperature? I've heard different things. There's nothing real set in stone, I think it seems like, with that. But
yeah, I feel like just doing like each one 3 times, so like 3 minutes hot, 3 minutes starting hot, no, sorry, the other way, no, because you want to finish cold, so starting hot, then cold, hot, cold, 3 minutes in each one. But yeah, I think important there to finish cold, even though it's much more fun to finish hot. But finishing cold, I think, is the way to go with that. But correct me if I'm wrong on that, Bryan.
No, that's that's what, stuff that I found that I've read different things where, the time will change a little bit, but I'd say, 3 minutes and each one is nice and certainly feels better getting in the warm bath, initially. The ice bath is great. I use that a lot for different types of training, not always just running. There's been some articles out saying that you have decreased protein synthesis after ice bath. I don't know how big of a factor that would really be, but they say, okay, well, if you're strength training and you're trying to get the best gains, you might not want to, do cryotherapy as often or as long. I don't know. I
And
think there'd be like
Brian, isn't there like a window with that? Like you want to let your body respond to the trauma before like introducing exogenous forms of recovery such as massage, ice bath, cryotherapy, like that kind of thing. Like you want to wait like 4 hours. Am I right on that?
I've heard similar things, and I don't know if there's studies done on how someone would affect how that would affect their performance immediately. So that might be getting pretty microscopic. I don't know. It's kind of, I would say if it's a trend that feels good and you enjoy doing it and motivates you to work out harder, probably not a bad thing. And a lot of times, even from running to strength training, it's that mental component that seems to be oftentimes the biggest. With ice baths, though, I would mention that for some folks, and it's not always just people who've been avid lifelong athletes, that have inherently people who have been athletes and at Ryan's level are going to respond much quicker in terms of the physiological adaptations that they've spent years working really hard to build up. For someone who it's their first marathon, that response is going to be different. And where ice bath might not be your best option, and like Ryan was saying, you might want to wait a little bit before diving in. One, from someone who's having really bad cramping after the marathon, and slapping ice on that might make it worse because it's going to make the blood vessels constrict and the muscles going to constrict more. But more medically relevant is hypothermia after a long race. So in Eugene, where the temperature might be depending, and now virtually people are running at different temperatures because anywhere from, was it the May 22nd till, or April 22nd to May 2nd, that if they're running and it's 40 something degrees out, they're going to likely have more of a risk of hypothermia after a long run. So you wouldn't necessarily want to jump in an ice bath right after that. But it's also, I base that on your symptoms. If you're not shivering, you're not getting the goose pimples and feeling those kind of woozy effects, then probably fine. But if it's a warmer day, again, probably fine. But I did the medical tent 3 years ago, and that was most of the cases that we got in there were people who were having hypothermia. Most other injuries were different than that.
So I'm curious, changing subjects a little bit here, but not really entirely. Ryan, one of the things that stands out about your wife Sarah's career, at least recently, is how quickly she's been able to come back from one marathon to the next. Just last fall, she got second in the London Marathon. It was an amazing performance, and a couple months later, correct me if I'm wrong, 6 weeks later, she won the marathon project down in Arizona, running 2:20. Very not a standard turnaround, and I'm curious if maybe part of that is due to what Bryan's talking about here, that there's potentially a quicker turnaround for someone, or a quicker response for someone who's highly trained. Sarah, certainly super experienced athlete, but can you talk about how maybe using Sarah as an example, but how do you know when you're ready to get going again? Like what's without a real injury, say, how do you know when you're ready to get training again?
Yeah, no, that is such a good question. and one that I played with a lot throughout my career. Like I remember after I ran 204 in Boston, I remember having a conversation with an advisor I was working with. I was like, man, my legs feel good. Like I'm ready to go. And I started training after like a week off, and then just like blew up, got super tired, run down like 3 months later. Right. So there is those times where like muscularly you're like, my legs are good. And I think especially now with the shoe technology guys are in with, this new foam and carbon plates, like athletes are able to do things that they couldn't do before in terms of recovering because there's less pounding on the body, right? And so I think we're seeing recovery getting better and better. But so I would just say have caution, like err on the side of too much recovery coming out of your marathon. Like every time I tried to take less than 2 weeks, I crashed and burned. Like it didn't work for me. And I think a big part of it is like you need to look at, okay, muscularly, am I ready to go again? But then the other big component, I think especially for guys, but for girls as well, is the hormonal component, right? So like if I was just a normal dude and I wasn't doing weightlifting or running, I'd probably be about 160 pounds just walking around a normal guy, right? And yet here I am racing a marathon at 140 pounds and being super lean, down at like 4% body fat is what I tested at after I ran 206 in London. And that's not a great place to be hormonally. So I might be muscularly recovered and ready to go, but my testosterone is still really low and it's not rebounded because I'm not at a healthy weight. And so I needed to wait longer than Sarah, for example, because I needed to put weight on my frame because I was so far underweight compared to what I'd normally be. Whereas you look at someone like Sarah, she's just naturally a much smaller person. Like she's probably running a couple pounds lighter than she would run if she was just walking around a normal person, right? So like she's in a very much a better place just walking around health wise. Her hormones, like everything, like she doesn't need to get super light, diet down like I had to do being a bigger person. So you have to take that into account and be like, okay, am I good muscularly? Am I good hormonally? And then like if you're just like chomping at the bit and you're like, I got to get back into it, probably take a couple more days. Like what I tell my athletes now is if you want to get to the next level, you have to let go of your fitness. And that's the hardest thing to do. After you run a big race, you run a big personal best, you rip something really good, you get all excited and you're just like, dude, I'm just going to keep this going. I'm just going to roll this into the next build up and then I'm going to be really flying. And every time I tried to do that, and I tried that like probably half a dozen times in my career, crashed and burned every single time. Like you got to let go of your fitness and you got to realize like the body, the earth that we live in, it's all based on cycles, seasons. And anytime we just try to keep doing the same thing for a really long period of time, it usually doesn't work out. So I think, pro runners are really good at knowing that and knowing that they need to cycle their training. There needs to be a rest period after their big marathons, no matter if they hit it big or they didn't hit it big, no matter where they're at emotionally, like they need to come down from that and they need to regroup, get their body back in a healthy spot, and then start their training back up.
That certainly resonates. I partially just having trained with you, Ryan, I think I might have been there for a couple of those times when you got right back on the horse, and we're definitely ambitious with that sometimes, which is.
I remember I'd always be all self-conscious because I would like disappear for 2 weeks, come back to our training group, and my face would be all super fat. Like you guys are like, what have you been doing the last 2 weeks? But every time I did that, I did well in my next marathon. Every time I didn't do that, it didn't go well. So,
another question I had that this is for Bryan, but it stems from an anecdote that I remember about Ryan. I remember Ryan when you were a freshman in college. I remember you showed up. I was a year older than you, and Ryan showed up with a calf injury of some sort, and we're at this training camp with our whole team, and my memory is of Ryan just sitting in the living room of this condo that we were all staying in, rolling his calf for hours and hours a day. And just, it was like this compulsive therapy sort of. And so I may have exaggerated my mind a little bit, but I feel like that fits my memory of freshman Ryan, who was really pretty dialed in on everything, almost to, and I think in this case, I'm suggesting actually to a detrimental point. And I'm wondering, Bryan, how that resonates with you in terms of from a physical therapy standpoint, as someone's recovering, is there too much recovery? Is there too much therapy?
Well, I mean, on a similar token, my wife always makes fun of me of like my 101 self-mobilization things, foam rollers and tennis balls and lacrosse balls and rolly things, I think a good way to look at it, there's a great book that I read recently, called Ready to Run, by Kelly Starrett. He's a physical therapist. He wrote the Supple Leopard book. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one. And the way that he kind of talks about it, and I would say this echoes back to what Ryan was saying, is that if you're looking at your recovery as kind of like, it's a holistic thing. It's something you do as part of a daily practice, and looking at your mobility every day, taking your time to recover, not trying to rush the process, listening to your body. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't know. I think, yeah, someone could maybe get too microscopic about something, but that goes more into the mental game, which is a whole other can of worms. But for mobility, rather than looking at rest days, look at it as an active recovery day. In that book, he talks about don't take any days off, but that doesn't mean go, kill yourself with wind sprints every single day. It means take some time to do some cross training and some mobility work. And the mobility work, it should be part of a daily practice. That a lot of times we think of our bodies in this lifestyle where we go for a morning run and then we sit in an office for the rest of the day. But when you're sitting in that position, you're not getting that blood flow. Your muscles are getting short and tight. So you have to practice your mobility to break that cycle, which sitting is one of the worst things to do right after running for a long time, because it's the opposite position of running. So all the muscles that you want to be healthy and elongated are going to be tight and kind of a mess. So that's another thing to look at, is don't go right to the couch and sit for the rest of the day after a marathon. Like Ryan said, go for a walk, try to stay active, and then some cross training and depending on the person's goals following that, if you're doing any kind of aerobic work, and that could be weightlifting that gets your heart rate up, if you're doing more of a high intensity training or something, cross training, elliptical, bike, whatever it is, and you're getting some aerobic work during the weeks following your marathon, you're not going to lose those aerobic adaptations that you've worked to build up. So it's not necessarily going 180 degrees to doing nothing, but doing some active recovery that maybe isn't the sport that you're doing, so isn't running necessarily, but you're doing other work to maintain those adaptations. But I'd like that view of it's an everyday thing. It's something that you wake up, you get into a habit of doing some kind of mobility work and stretching and work that keeps your body healthy. And then his whole theory, the whole reason he called that book The Supple Leopard, is the idea that a leopard can go from 0 to 360 like that. It doesn't have to warm up and stretch and do all these things. It's ready to go. But unfortunately, as humans, we have to do that work pretty regularly. But the more that we do that on the regular basis, the quicker we can adapt to something. And when we're asking our bodies to really perform, then we're going to be able to do it.
I mean, it that certainly resonates with I think some of the things that Ryan and I got to learn early on. Not to put myself in the same category as Ryan here, but we had the opportunity to train with Dina Castor and Meb Keflezighi right after, started in 2005. So they had just both won Olympic medals in Athens in the marathon, and I think for both of us it was this like dream come true, kind of to get to train with that level of athlete. And one of the things that stuck out to me was if we were meeting for like a 9 a.m. run, Meb would show up at the gym an hour and a half early, something like that. He'd get in the hot tub. And he was getting, well, he wasn't even that old at that time, but he was, he was years ahead of us in terms of where he was in his running career, miles on his body and all that. He was really, really diligent about that. Just to Bryan, to your point, this was absolutely part of his training. Like his run didn't start at 9 a.m. It started at 7:30 with, this series of movements and mobilities and stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. I had one question on here too that I'm curious about, because I think I suspect that it pertains to some of our audience potentially who are getting ready to run here. The question really is sort of how healthy do you have to be to show up at a starting line, right? And so Ryan, I'm wondering if when you would start out at the starting line of a marathon, it's very different than a 5K or something. It's so much stress on your body. How did you think about that? I mean, am I right in assuming that most of your buildups never went perfectly? There's always some sort of setback. What kind of aches and pains did you show up on the starting line knowing you could run through? What didn't you? What were your red flags? Talk us through some of that.
Yeah, I think first off, like it's totally normal when you're tapering. Like just expect there's gonna be things, little aches and pains. You're like, where is this coming from? Like, so it's gonna feel so random, and I don't fully understand that. Maybe Bryan can speak to that, why that's the case. But I tended to always get just little aches and niggles in that last 2 weeks before a marathon, and there's always stuff that I could just work through it, and I was fine. I think my general rule of thumb when it comes to running through any injuries is that if it's sharp, you don't run through it. If it's getting worse as you go, you don't run through it. If it's causing you to limp, you don't run through it. So that's just kind of my like tried and true, really quick and easy checklist. And as long as like my little ache and pain isn't violating one of those rules or laws, then I go ahead and run through it, And in terms of like, you never feel ready for a marathon. Same way that like you never feel ready to have kids. You're never like, oh, I got this. Like no one's on the starting line being like, dude, I'm just gonna crush this. Like, like everyone's had little hiccups. Everyone's second guessing their fitness. Everyone feels like in the last 2 weeks they lost all their fitness. They got fat from their carb load. Like everyone's in the same boat, right? So just mentally, just being aware of that and not freaking out, and just being like, okay, this is a part of the journey, part of the process. I'm gonna go through some like mentally trying moments in this last two weeks. But I mean, you can run a marathon off so little training. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like advising anyone to like not train. Like I have run free training. It's a coaching business. We prepare athletes to run fast. But I mean, I retired from pro marathon running, and I was running like 3 days a week, like 6 to 8 miles a day, and ran 7 marathons in 7 days and 7 continents off that, right? And like it wasn't pretty. I got a stress fracture on day 5 in Morocco, but I got through it, right? So like even if you're not feeling prepared, like you can get through it. You can get to the finish line. It's just a question of how fun is it going to be? The more prepared you are, the better you've trained for an event, the more fun you're going to have in the race. So, but that's not necessarily bad. Like I loved running the 7 marathon, 7 days, 7 continents, because it was a really cool, epic challenge. And I wanted it to be harder than showing up to the starting line like super prepared like I typically be. It's just like a totally different experience when you're not ready for it. But I was like looking to embrace that challenge, So like maybe if your training didn't go so well, you missed a whole bunch of training, like maybe you just need to change your mindset and be like, okay, I'm not trying to PR here. I'm just like, this is gonna be a new type of challenge I've never taken on before. And I'm really curious to see how this goes. And I just know this. I know I can keep putting one foot in front of the other over and over and over again. And that's all I got to do. I got to just keep putting one more step, one more step, one more step. So, you can get through a marathon off very minimal training. You get through 7 marathons in a row off very minimal training. It's just, the ability to be mentally tough enough to just keep taking one more step.
Ryan, does that framework that Ryan mentioned, is it getting sharp? Is it a sharp pain? Is it getting worse? Is it causing you to limp? Does that resonate with you? Are there any other
things? Those are the exact same parameters I set for my patients that are on a return to run. And yeah, word for word, pretty much is how I describe that. I throw in sometimes like, on a pain scale, 0 to 10, you don't want to go over a 5. I call 5 that wincing threshold where, you can't mask that you're in pain anymore. And the mind is incredibly strong. And when you're running and there are natural things happening in your body to counterbalance those pain receptors. And that's not a bad thing, that's adapted, you know, but there will be times where, you know, an injury may not show up right away. And that's most of running related injuries. You know, traumatic injuries are more in sports where there's a lot more shear forces going on and impact and stuff like that. But it's that repetitive strain type thing that, you know, is it going to kill you to get through a little bit of tendonitis after a marathon? No. You know, will you adapt and recover? Yeah, 100%. And if your focus is on that goal, you know, that's an individual choice, individual basis, and that's nothing that's going to devastate somebody. The thing that I'm very interested in physical therapy right now is doing movement screening for injury prevention. And that can be a really useful tool for after running, you know, maybe not the next day, but a couple of days after, where you've recovered a little bit and bounced back, is a couple basic functional movements that you can assess yourself and go, okay, I'm not having any problems with that. I think I'm clear to start, you know, training again a little bit. And that's, again, totally individualized. You know, there's no hard and fast rule with those things. Depends on the person.
Interesting. So you're saying that that would be a set of movements that would indicate sort of structural integrity, structural readiness. Is that?
Yeah, the functional movement screen, or the FMS, has been around for a while, and they've done some great research. They focused a lot on military, as people who are going through a lot of heavy training, and finding ways to screen that to find out, okay, this person is very likely to develop some sort of injury, whether back injury or lower extremity injury or something like that. And Jay DeSherry, who he wrote the book Anatomy for Runners and Running Rewired, he talks about that in some of his books too, where he's kind of developed his own screen, very similar movements to the FMS, and other movement screens that I've studied kind of fall back on the same basic things, like overhead squat, you know, a lunge, a single leg balance, single leg squat. Can you do those movements with good symmetry and good form, good control? And then there's some mobility things. How much dorsiflexion do you have at your ankle? How much hip extension? Great toe extension, believe it or not, is one of the more vital ones that we overlook, that if we're not getting good push off, it's really going to affect your gait, and something might show up.
That's interesting. Yeah. So we're just about out of time here, but I do want to just on a personal level sort of ask Ryan about the differences. Like Ryan's, as I mentioned earlier, kind of lived two different athletic lives here. One as a marathoner and one now as a weightlifter, essentially. Is that the term that you would use, Ryan? Bodybuilder, weightlifter?
Yeah, it's kind of confusing. It's like powerlifting / bodybuilding.
So, and it's fascinating, right? I mean, super counterintuitive, right? There's not many guys that run, well, there's not many guys that run 204, period. I don't think there's anybody who runs 204 who then goes on to that type of athletic, you know, level that you've achieved here. You've put on a lot of weight, you've become incredibly strong. What can you just talk about, like self-care wise? You know, I know obviously you're consuming a ton of calories now. That's probably a big difference. But from an injury perspective, self-care, can you talk about the difference between those two athletic lives that you've lived?
Yeah, it's been super interesting because I'm kind of a mad scientist. Like, I like to experiment a lot on myself. I don't experiment on my athletes or athletes we train at Run Free Training. I give them the tried and true stuff, but I'm experimenting in the weight room like every single day. So like, I'm not afraid to go outside the box. So I've been training ridiculously hard since I retired from running 5 years ago. Like, I go 60 to 90 to 2 hours sometimes, like really hard, like to failure every single day, kind of hard. And that kind of I say that and I can feel people like bristling up, being like, you shouldn't do that, like that's, you know, there's something wrong with you. And but that is just like me. That's what makes me tick. That's what I love to do. But there's also this saying that I've learned from bodybuilding, strength training: there's no such thing as overtraining. There's just under fueling, undersleeping, and under recovery. And of course, that is not 100% true, right? Like I can't do 500-pound deadlifts every single day. Like that's not going to work. Although there are programs where it's a squat every day program, guys get stronger on it. So like there's all kinds of really interesting stuff to study in the weightlifting realm. But a lot of the principles between weightlifting and running are very, very similar. It's like we are holistic people. We're a holistic package. And oftentimes we like to just isolate the training variable and be like, I just need to get the training right, like the perfect plan, the perfect workouts, when really it's like, well, your sleep is off. So no matter what you're doing, it's not going to work. So like, for example, when I'm doing lifting, I'll do the same exact training from the time I'm cutting, when I'm trying to lose weight, and when I'm bulking and getting bigger and stronger. And the only variable that changes is the amount of calories I'm taking in. If I'm taking in 3,500 calories a day, I'm losing weight, I'm losing strength. If I'm taking in 5,000 calories a day, I'm getting stronger, I'm getting bigger, right? And so I think any discussion about athletics in general, it's like we got to look at the holistic person and the holistic package. It's not enough to just talk about the training or just talk about the sleep or just talk about the nutrition or the recovery aspect. Like you got to have all of that working together. And when you have all that dialed in is when really fun stuff happens. Like it's been so much fun for me to go from 5'10", 127 pounds to 5'10", 200 pounds at night, and now I'm starting to cut weight a little bit. But seeing like what I love about weightlifting is just seeing growth, seeing change in the body is just so much fun. It's like the other day I couldn't lift up 515 pounds deadlift, and now I can, and it's just so gratifying for me to get in the weight room, play with things, have fun with things, and then just be intuitive with how I'm moving my body. That's something that I really learned from weightlifting, because I thought I'd get hurt in the gym if I just went hard all the time. But I've just found I just don't put my body in compromising positions. If I get in a position and it doesn't feel right, I'm like, it's a no-go. Like I'm not going to try and lift. And I think that's important when it comes to runners and strength training and just runners in general. If you're going out for that run and you're like, I feel like something's going to snap on this run, like it's probably a good idea to do some cross training, like find other ways. There's always other ways to get fitter and to accomplish the same goal, right? So yeah, it's been a super fun journey, and one that's keeping me sharp. It's keeping me growing as a coach as well. Like stuff I'm learning in the weight room is translating to Sarah's training, to my athletes training, and just been super fun for me to kind of explore as a hobby.
It's been fun to watch as a fan, man. It's very really interesting.
I got to ask, Bryan, do you work more in like sprinting kind of running or shorter distances now that you've kind of changed your body type and are working more in that realm?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I haven't done a lot of sprinting just because I don't have that much time, right? So I'm like I allow myself one hobby, and it's lifting. I have 60 minutes to 2 hours to do that. But I would love, like when I do get on the beach, I was on the beach the other day and just sprinting with my kids. It felt so good. I was like, I actually feel like a sprinter now. Like I felt like a totally different person. And even I could get my body into positions I couldn't get into when I was a distance runner, because I have so much more power in my legs. So it is really like my sprint speed's way better now than when I was running professionally. And that's without doing any sprint training at all. It's just all in the gym training. So that has been super fun for me to feel that power in my legs. I'm like, this is like what these guys feel like when they're sprinting. I never like experienced that when I was a distance runner before. So that's been super fun.
It would have been amazing to do a biopsy of your muscle fibers pre and post here. That would have been a really cool thing to see.
I know. Yeah, because I know you can swing stuff to some extent. So yeah, it would have been interesting to see.
Looking at changes, I think it's got to be possible. I mean, your body changes right there would attest to that. But changing from type 1 to type 2 fibers, clearly it's got to be some of that going on if you've made those kind of gains. So
yeah, I'd hope so.
I think every time I talk with Ryan, and hear you talk about this change, it's super empowering, I think, in a way where it shows that training works, right? Like our bodies adapt. And I think that whether you're trying to lift more weights or run or stay healthy or whatever, it's a really empowering concept, right? And to see that in you, to see that, like, yes, it's you have control over a lot of things, right? You have the power to train your body in these certain ways. And I always come away kind of inspired by that. So I appreciate that. And I think it's really, really interesting. So I think we're gonna wrap up here. I think we're at the end of our time. Unless there's anything either of you would like to close out with.
Man, I'm just thankful for the Eugene Marathon. You guys have been such a light during the COVID season to your runners, but also to pro runners, giving us opportunities to go run times. And we just appreciate you guys and the work you're doing, and looking forward to when you guys are back in person. Next year is going to be epic. I think that's one thing I've realized with all the COVID season, now that races are starting to come back a little bit. And of course, it's not full swing yet, but looking forward to this fall is like, man, there's gonna be so much gratitude out there on those courses. So looking forward to next year's version being in person and seeing all you guys get together in Eugene and roll out a good marathon.
Yeah, absolutely. Very psyched that people have the opportunity to still participate in something, even virtual. There's still the buzz in the air. I was out running this morning and saw some other runners out there, and you can feel that energy. So it's so fantastic that we have this, and looking forward to next year, hopefully being in person at that point. So awesome.
Yeah. What is a great community. I'm really glad you two are part of it. So thank you both. And we, look forward to hopefully seeing you both in person soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ian.
We are a bridge between timeless values and the ever-changing communities we serve. PeaceHealth's heritage began more than 125 years ago with a mission to help those who need it most. And as our world continues to evolve, so does our story. We will change, yet our mission will endure. With our community partners, we can address the threats to human dignity. Together, we can make an impact beyond the walls of healthcare, housing, transportation, nutrition, education. At PeaceHealth, the touchstone of our past is guiding us to the future. A simple, timeless mission. Care for those who need it. Health justice for all.